Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Season 1, Episode 6, Lift Us Where Suffering Cannot Reach. If you have not seen this episode yet, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you, so that is your official spoiler warning. So, getting into this episode, this is very clearly my least favorite episode of the show so far. In fact, I would easily say it's the weakest. Now, last week I said that that episode was my least favorite, but I gave the caveat that it was really good, that I really liked it. So I was like, if this is my least favorite, what an amazing show. And I think I said that even to the week previously. I called it my least favorite, but that was the one with the Gorn. That was an amazing episode, so that was my least favorite. It shows you how much I actually loved the show. Although in retrospect, I think I like the Gorn episode better than episode 1, so it probably wasn't even my least favorite. But anyway, this is different. This is very clearly I think a weak episode, and I think it's the first weak episode of the season of the show. And I don't know if I'd go so far to say that I don't like this episode or that I hate it, but it's middling at best. It's got a lot of issues. Like, the more I think about this episode, the more it falls apart. The more issues I have with it, with the structure, with the plot, how it works. I mean, I love the actors. The chemistry between the characters is always great, so that's a plus. The actors are amazing as always, and it's great learning more about these characters and getting more intricacies of how their interactions. So that's always a plus. But all of the issues I have with this episode center around its plot, which I think honestly was kind of poorly constructed. So let me get to the heart of the matter of what issues I had with this episode, and that is seems to be like a Hollywood trope, and it's one of my least favorite tropes that kind of really annoys me. I mean, I suppose there's been some instances where I was willing to forgive it if it wasn't that big of a deal. Not say something. If a character would have just spoken up and said something, then it would have solved the issue before it ever happened, and then there would be no plot and there would be no suspense. But of course, the writers want a plot. They want there to be conflict. They want there to be suspense. So they have to contrive this character to remain silent and not simply say, "Hey," just so this story could happen, but it comes off as a huge contrivance that doesn't actually fit together, and that as I said, that trope bothers me, and that definitely was the case here, because I can't even remember any of the characters' names, but there was, the father with the child who was like the holy child savior or whatever. And so, of course, we learned the huge twist. The first servant, I believe they called him. Anyway, the huge twist is that the first servant is just going to be sacrificed so that, basically, I don't really understand the exact technology, but it seems like that the world was terraformed and they need to feed the child's synapses in order to maintain the perfect terraformed world. Otherwise, the rivers will dry up and all this other bullshit, and so they'll lose their paradise. So here's the thing: the father was trying to save the boy's life, and so he was secretly working with these colonists, who are offshoots of another world. Of this world, I mean, who lived on another colony that was desolate, so apparently they refused to use this terraforming technology. And so he was working with them to try to save the boy's life, but he didn't want this known, so he kept it a secret. Why? Now, I know why he kept it a secret from what's-her-face and his own world, because they would, arrest him, execute him, or whatever. But why keep it a secret from Pike? When very clearly, if he told Pike about this from the very beginning, Pike would absolutely be on his side. Because we find out when Pike does, and the Enterprise crew, not just Pike, but the whole Enterprise crew, when they find out the truth, they immediately take his side. So wouldn't it have been like a good idea for him to tell them earlier so they could have taken his side before the boy was essentially dead or sacrificed? So what I'm saying is the whole plot of the episode wouldn't have happened if, alright, so this starts off where the Enterprise saves this ship from another ship, and they take the people aboard, and the father guy is being a bit of an obstinate asshole, and blah, 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 and he's having, of course, to placate the what's her face? I really need to learn these characters' names. But Pike's love interest, whatever her damn name was, Allura. Okay, so he, of course, is having to put on the show for Allura, so she doesn't suspect that he's trying to take the boy away, which of course, would doom their world or whatever. But why doesn't he just, when Allura is not there? And there were plenty of scenes with him where Allura was not present, where he could just be like, hey, they're going to kill this boy, so why don't you help me save him? And for a fact, because we know from the end of the episode, that they would be like, yes, that Pike would save the boy, and his life would be saved, and they would take him to the colony world. Problem solved. But you know what? You could actually have a story about how doing so, though, is going to doom all these people and destroy the world. So that would actually be an interesting morality tale. So it's not only they keep the secrets so they could have a plot, but if they didn't do the stupid plot contrivance, then they could have, dare I say, an even better plot, or at least a different plot, where they're dealing with the moral dilemma of this terraformed world that's about to crack. And that, to me, that actually sounds like a more interesting episode, where the rivers dry up and everything goes fucking nuts, and the Pike has to deal with the consequences that all these people are suffering because he saved one life. But then, of course, that would make it a kind of a different morality tale than the one they currently have. But it would make a lot more fucking sense, and I think that would be the better episode. So, because this was a mystery episode, down to its core, because they withheld this information from the audience until the end of the episode to make it a huge, shocking twist. Now, this is something I've taken a lot of beginners classes and studied a lot of writing and story writing, and a lot of things they'll tell you, a lot of huge mistakes that especially beginning writers will make, is to add in twists just for the sake of having a twist. And I've read a lot of amateur stories that definitely I can see that is a trick. I can only imagine what a writing teacher has to read all these stories where there's twists for no goddamn good reason, just because they think it's clever to have a twist. But so one of the things they make clear in all these writing classes is that if you are going to have a twist, it has to have it serve a function, the story. It needs to add to the characters. It needs to add to the whole meaning of the story. It can't just be there to be there. And honestly, I think this twist is there to be there. Because I think if you take out the twist, and that's not saying change the situation of the young boy being sacrificed. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying reveal it immediately instead of holding it for a twist. That's what I mean by having a twist, because and I've actually been told this by teachers in my own writing. They're saying, why are you withholding this information? Wouldn't it be more interesting if you actually revealed it up front? Which I did, and I'm like, you're right. It actually helps the story, helps the audience to have this information from the beginning, rather than try to be like, ha-ha! Tricked him in some clever twist. And that's what this episode does. It actually think would have been a much more interesting story if they had revealed this information from the very beginning, and thus, as I said, you could have Pike and the Enterprise crew dealing with the moral dilemma of saving one boy's life, but then wreaking havoc on a planetary scale. In fact, they would be extremely breaking the Prime Directive, because they would cause all the suffering on a global scale by saving the one boy's life. And if you did it that way, it would take away the contrivance of why the fuck the father didn't just speak up in the first place. Now, I know some people could come up with some BS excuses. Well, maybe he was intimidated. Maybe he didn't trust the Pike or the Enterprise crew. Or maybe, he was too scared or whatever. But I say, those are all just excuses that I do not buy. Now, because even at the end, even after they arrested him, it took him for fucking ever to speak up and be like, no, you don't understand. And I'm like, well, why the fuck didn't you just explain it to him earlier? I mean, it should have been freaking obvious that they would have joined their side from the... But at the very least, they would have all the information and they would be able to make informed decisions. Anyway, and just outside of this, the father, just forgetting about him for a second, that he should have spoke up, just forget about that. I think the fact that they turned this into a mystery episode where there was withholding this information toward the end, I think that overall didn't work. I think it overall hurt the story. Now, the other thing I was going to get into was with Pike having this old flame and reigniting this romance with the woman who turns out to be like the villain of the episode. That's what I say about that. It reminded me a lot of like the original series, because Kirk would always he would run into an old flame like all the fucking time. And I realized while I was watching this episode why the writers would do that is because when you introduce a new romance, and this happens a lot in bad Romance of the Week Star Trek episodes, you don't really buy it. Like, they just meet each other for 5 seconds and all of a sudden they're deeply in love. So it's kind of a narrative cheat to just be like, oh, they have had a prior relationship. That way it more easily explains why they fall in love so fucking fast, because they actually had already fallen in love. They're just reigniting something that already happened. So that's a nice little narrative cheat they used here, so that they could explain why why Pike would get it busy with this woman he just met, because he didn't just meet her. Narrative cheat. Anyway, so I wasn't a fan of that, I didn't really like the Uhura and La'an side plot. I don't know. I didn't hate it. It's not the worst thing ever. It's just kind of annoyed me the way she was like, that's lesson number 1 and that's lesson number 2. And I don't really like how Uhura is like jumping from department to department. I don't know if I've ever seen them do this with cadets before. Usually, especially like stuff like Lower Decks, they make it kind of clear like, once you hit your department, that's where you're staying. Like when Nog, he was a cadet studying on Deep Space Nine and doing whatever, and he was in engineering the whole time. They didn't like shunt him from department to department. So I don't know. I mean, some people might tell me, well, in real life university situations, that's what they do, but do they? I don't know. It seems like when you specialize in something, you stick with that field. I don't know. Maybe this is just like her getting more experience to make her more of a well-rounded character, or officer. But I don't know. So I have to say, I don't think it's the worst thing ever. It kind of just, but the main thing that bothered me about it was the whole La'an being like, that's lesson number 5 and that's lesson number 2. And then something another YouTuber pointed out to me, which I didn't even notice, was the fact that everyone else around La'an was like acting like they knew her. It's like, yeah, you make the first mistake. But La'an just came aboard the fucking ship the same time that Uhura did. So how would they know what the fucking lessons are? So, yeah, so I don't know. That, and it was a bit of a contrivance how they had that, the aunt steal this piece of technology that seemed to completely waste of time plot point that meant absolutely nothing and didn't really need to be there. So, yeah, I don't know. I wasn't a huge fan of that storyline either. Now, here's the thing with the Mbega thing. This I actually found a bit more interesting with his daughter. I love how the little boy came and, like, found out about her because he's really super stuck in a transporter and then having your dad read stories to you and read the same chapter over and over again. Also, like, that was a nice touch with the reading the same chapter because that does show that for her, she's experiencing time like it's just happening, but for him, like, it was a long time ago and he couldn't remember what chapter he read. You think he would, like, take a note or something and, like, oh, you read this chapter and this is where you are in the book? Seems like that would be an easy enough thing to do, but it was an interesting way to illustrate how time is passing differently between the two characters, and it was nice to having the little boy, like, come in and actually introduce some fun to her. Now, I thought it was an interesting idea that these people actually had the cure for her, and Mega was kind of stuck on this sort of impasse. In fact, the dude was like, we can't share with outsiders, but, if we eventually form an alliance, like, say, for example, you let us in the Federation, then we will be able to save her. So that was, like, an interesting sort of added edge to them trying to make peace with these people, which went nowhere. Like, it's a really interesting idea, and it would have been nice if they'd done something with it, which they didn't, because they were already friendly with these people at the start. It wasn't until towards the end that the relationship went sour, and Mbega had absolutely nothing to do with that. So the fact that he had an interest in, saving this girl's life, didn't actually play a part in this moral dilemma. So they could have done that differently, where it actually mattered, but they didn't. And then, of course, the father guy did sort of, because he defected at the end, and so he did help in Mega, but apparently he didn't have the technology himself he had no access anymore because he's defecting to save the girl, but he could do what he can to sort of help and come up with a treatment to at least not cure the disease, but as a treatment that going forward that they could use to improve her life. Which, all well and good, but to me, I thought it would have been more interesting storytelling if it played a more direct role in the plot. And yeah. What else about this episode? So, I don't know. Yeah, so it was basically a murder mystery type thing. You have the guard who's defecting, and you don't know why, and he says that he's doing it to save the first servant or whatever, but then you find out. I don't know. Like, they were hinting at stuff like a greater geopolitical situation here, but they didn't really get into it. Okay, so I know what I really want to get into. I want to get into this moral dilemma that this episode does present, because it's obviously making commentary for modern day life on how we are very, abhorrent on any child abuse or any, killing of children, particularly when it comes to other cultures which neglect children. Yet our whole way of life causes some of the suffering that children have. I mean, you can just look at the recent controversy with the children being forcibly removed from their parents and held in detention trying to immigrate from Mexico to the United States and stuff like that. And there's a lot of, so it's an interesting commentary to be made, and it's one that I actually really agree with. However, it doesn't really work here in this situation because what's her phrase, Alora, like throws that back into Pike's face, like, oh well, how many children need to suffer for your federation to exist? We actually encounter it. But here's the thing. The answer to her question should be 0 because the federation has evolved beyond poverty. She mentioned poverty. She's like, oh, how many children in poverty? But poverty doesn't exist in the Federation, or at least not Earth. Maybe there's some other Federation worlds that have poverty, but I don't think so. I think that would be a requirement of the Federation, joining the Federation, is that you would have to evolve beyond that sort of thing. So the answer to Pike's question should have been to her question. The answer Pike should have said was 0, because this is not modern day society where our a lot of the first world privileges comes at the expense of suffering in third world countries. This is Star Trek. This is the Federation, where they've moved beyond that. Has Troy and Picard and everyone, a lot of people have stated, we have eliminated poverty. They said that flat out. So, yeah, so this is why this analogy doesn't work. I like what they're trying to say. I agree with the commentary, but it doesn't fit in this Star Trek setting. Because the whole point of Roddenberry's vision in this Star Trek setting, which I know later shows like Picard and stuff often forget, is that all of that shit has been eliminated. Now, as of course, it's not a completely perfect society. There's some good episodes of Deep Space Nine that explore that there's costs to having a paradise on Earth, but that doesn't really factor in here. So that annoyed me. In fact, when she had said that to Pike, I expected him to respond with nothing. We've eliminated poverty in the Federation, because that's the right fucking answer. But anyway, my rating for... I gotta look up this episode title because it has a ridiculously long name. My rating for Lift Us Where Suffering Cannot Reach, out of 10, I think I'm gonna give this a 5 average. It's the first episode to get a poor rating from me. It's the highest poor rating I can give, though. It's more of a, as I say, average is the rating I'm giving it. Because, there's just way too many issues I had with this. Some of the side plots, even I wasn't a huge fan of. As I said, though, there were things I did like. I liked the character explanation with Mbega and his daughter. I like just seeing the interactions. I love Anson Mount playing Pike. He's just amazing as Pike, and seeing how Pike would react in this situation was great. And even though the mystery is contrived and shouldn't exist, it was kind of exciting following this mystery. It's a bit of a letdown, though, once you find out that this whole situation would have been resolved by someone just saying, hey, speaking up at the start of the goddamn episode, and they could have solved everything before it happened. But anyway, that is it for my review of this latest episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Thanks so much for watching. I shall be back next week and every week hereafter to cover the rest of Strange New Worlds, and I also cover other shows on my channel, such as all sorts of other Star Trek shows, all things Star Trek, like Deep Space Nine, for example, and covering other shows like Star Wars, Rebels, The Expanse, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.